Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of the Somerville Planning Board. I am the chair, Mike Capuano. It is 6:01 p.m. on January 21st, 2021. It's our first meeting of the new year, maybe second. Either way, with me is Sam Dinning, Amelia Aba, Rob Buchanan, and John Habib. We have a full complement of members of the planning board this evening. And before we get started, pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, general laws, chapter 30A, section 18, and the governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, as well as Mayor Curtatoni's declaration of emergency, dated March 15th, 2020, this meeting of the planning board will be conducted via remote participation. We will have an audio recording available upon request as soon as possible after the meeting. This meeting is being recorded. We have a few items on our agenda this evening. Approval of minutes from January 7th, so I was wrong. We did have an earlier meeting in January. We also have the continuation of a public hearing on 101 to 153 South Street, which has been heard and discussed quite extensively. We've received quite a bit of public testimony, both oral and written. We will take that up again this evening. We also have two other business items, which is the planning board representative to the Community Preservation Committee and the Summervision Comprehensive Plan. Now, based on the fact that Amelia has recused herself from discussion on 101 to 153 South Street, it's the discretion of the chair to take agenda items out of order, and we'll be taking up the other business first so that we can get that out of the way, so we don't have to kind of call Amelia back in after a period of time. So I would like to start out with the meeting minutes of January 7th, 2021. Has everybody had a chance to review those meeting minutes? Does anybody have any proposed revisions or edits? No? Seeing none, the chair moves to adopt those minutes, seconded by the clerk. We'll have a roll call vote. The chair votes aye.
Sam votes aye.
Amelia votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
Phenomenal. We have a unanimous vote in adopting minutes. Next up, I'm going to take the Summervision Comprehensive Plan discussion. I think there's a date that might be coming our way, and I don't know who among staff would like to address that agenda item, but whosoever it is, let's unmute you and hear what you got to say.
Mr. Chair, this is Rebecca speaking. I am unmuting my colleague Victor Nascimento, and he will be presenting to us.
Thank you.
Victor, you're unmuted, and I have made you a presenter. Victor, we're having a little trouble with your audio. Can you switch to a microphone?
Can you hear me okay now?
You're very echoey.
Okay, I can try a different audio setup.
Okay, is this better?
That's much better. Thank you.
All right, great. And is my screen displaying okay?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. To those who don't know me, my name is Victor Nascimento. I am the Planning Outreach Coordinator, and I was part of the Summer Vision 2040 team.
Victor, I'm sorry, this is Rebecca speaking. Is everyone still able to see the screen, or did it disappear for everyone? All right, Victor, you seem not to be sharing your screen anymore. There we go.
Okay. All right, sorry about that. Let's start over. My name is Victor Nascimento. I'm the Planning Outreach Coordinator, and I was part of the Summer Vision 2040 team. And the reason why I'm here to present today is that we've made some updates to the document and have released a new version of it. I'm going to start by giving a quick overview of what the comprehensive plan is, just to refresh everyone's memories. And then I'm going to focus on talking about what has changed in the new version of the document. So a comprehensive plan is a policy document that establishes a broad community vision for values and goals, helps guide future neighborhood plans and other planning efforts, and helps set priorities for future development. And it's important to note that it's not an implementation document. So the tasks and goals outlined in it are really meant to serve as a framework for future implementation strategies that require more in-depth community outreach and research. So there were two really key themes that came out of Summer Vision 2040. One was that we want to apply an equity lens to everything we do in the city. This has always been a part of our thought process and how we approach policy, but we want to be a lot more systemic about it. And identifying equity as an awareness that not all of our residents are coming from the same place in terms of opportunities, and that we can't just offer services in a way that treats everyone the same, because not everyone has had a same starting point. Another key point in Summer Vision 2040 was that displacement is one of the biggest crises facing our community, and that households are being displaced due to high housing costs, and that has a lot of ripple effects in dismantling a lot of old neighborhoods and existing communities. Part of how we wrote Summer Vision 2040 was through a community outreach and engagement process that included forming a Summer Vision committee that had over 60 members that worked directly in writing the document with the guidance of staff, as well as using a variety of different strategies to get community members involved at all different levels. This included games and forums, public meetings, web-based approaches, as well as in-person based approaches, forums to specific groups that were done in multiple languages, or with folks who were from communities that we don't always hear from, like teenagers or folks in elderly homes. And we put all of that together in the process of writing the document. The new version process of how we got to this version of the document we're releasing now is that we had a draft of Summer Vision 2040 release at the end of 2019. We received extensive feedback once we put that draft available for the public and had open comment period. We analyzed and cataloged that feedback. In the spring of 2020, as we all know, a lot of the processes around the city had been put on hold as we focused on dealing with the COVID crisis. And then in the winter of last year, we were able to come back to Summer Vision, added the document based on all the community feedback we received, and then reconvened the Summer Vision committee to approve all of those edits. And where we're at now is presenting this new version of the plan for approval by the planning board and endorsement by the city council. Now I'm going to do a quick overview of what changed in the document. This won't be comprehensive. I know that the board received an email with a detailed change list for the document, and I recommend referencing back that change list in comparison to the new document version, which is posted on summervision2040.com. But I want to touch base on a few key things. We created two new spreads in the document. 2020, an unprecedented year, is a new two-page spread that really focuses on all of the unique aspects of 2020 and the shock that caused to all our community in terms of the impact on businesses and the health of our residents, as well as the general economic well-being of our workers. And then we created another spread, implementation one step at a time, that was really meant to address some of the community concerns that the comprehensive plan didn't go into enough detail on how we would implement some of those policies. And it's really to make the argument that that was not within the scope of this document, but that we do have a process in mind about how we're going to dig deeper into those implementation steps for many of the tasks and goals outlined in the document. As part of that, we created an implementation graphic that was added to the document. It's really just to give an idea to readers of all of the different moving parts that are involved in implementing any task or goal that's outlined in the document, which includes getting approval for funding, doing additional financial research, establishing partnerships involving boards and committees, and that's not a linear process, that it goes back and forth, and many of these groups can be involved multiple times throughout the process. Some of the key edits we made directly to the document include a sidebar referencing expanding capacity with Racial and Social Justice Department that's being added to the city. We mentioned that we need to evaluate waste streams in the city in a more detailed way. We added several new commercial development tasks into the commercial development chapter, a lot of them addressing some of the particular vulnerabilities that have become clear after the COVID crisis. We added a new sidebar about indoor community space needs, and this was one of the feedback that we received, that we need open space, but also indoor community spaces. We added a sidebar about universal design under the housing section. We added an explanation about mobility hubs. We added a new goal about expanding off-street multimodal paths and connecting them throughout the city. We added more information on shared streets, which was also a COVID development, and some of the experimentations that we've been able to do during this time period to open the streets more for pedestrians and outdoor seating. We added more information about pollinators, and we added a sentence about how our libraries and recognizing the strength that they bring to our community. And then lastly, we added some more information about Title IX. The last piece I'll mention is we received a lot of feedback from some of our senior community members that they felt the document didn't necessarily reflect them as much. We felt a lot of their concerns were in the document, but not identified in a way that was relatable to them. So we really went back and tried to make that a stronger point. We streamlined the vocabulary so that we would always talk about seniors versus using other terms that may not be recognizable. We added grow older to the statement of live, work, play, raise a family in the city. We mentioned that the threat of displacement is particularly strong when you're dealing with residents who are low income or fixed income, which often applies to seniors. We talked about the digital divide and the impact that has in the senior community as well as AARP, age-friendly cities, and some information about how Somerville fits into that. We talked about communication platforms in the city and ensuring that digital platforms are more accessible to senior communities, as well as adding more detail about senior housing needs, walkability, and seating as an equity goal when we talk about open spaces. So that's basically all I have for you for now. And as I mentioned, the new version of the document is posted on summervision2040.com. And I'm happy to answer any questions and as well as follow up with you via email any additional details.
Victor, thank you very much. I don't have any questions. I do have a comment. I do appreciate the fact that it's something that's come up in a number of both specific projects and plans that the city's come out with in the past that I think has not been as addressed as specifically and forcefully as what you just presented here is making sure that the city is accessible to seniors. We obviously focus a lot on kind of the bigger picture aspects of live, work, play, and that tends to be focused on folks that might still have a live income and using our city and its resources in a different way. And I think we have taken we haven't focused enough and we haven't emphasized the fact that a large percentage of our community tend to be older adults. And we need to make sure that the city works for them as well. In many circumstances, they're people that have grown up here and already, lived, worked, played, and raised families, and they want to stay here. And I think it's a strong addition to the plan to include them in our goals. So thank you for that.
Thank you for a comment.
Anybody else with comments or questions? I'd like to be able to bring this up at a future meeting once folks have had an idea of kind of what all of this is, and maybe coordinate with the council and with staff to make sure that we're all on the same page before we choose to vote on adoption of this plan. So if anybody else has any comments, let's hear them. Otherwise, I'd like to move the discussion to a future date. Yes, Amelia.
Mr. Chair, just as the planning board's designee to the Summer Vision 2040 committee, I want to reiterate that the process has been incredibly thorough. It's had a huge amount of community outreach and a really diligent effort by the staff team in this sort of second wave of feedback that was received leading up to this revision. So I'm really excited to see this, and I'm looking forward to getting it approved soon, because so long as we continue to make small tweaks, we're still operating under the 2030 version. And I think there's a lot in here that builds upon that in a direction that I'm really excited to see.
Thank you. Rob, did I see your hand?
Yeah, and thank you. I think Amelia may have partially answered it. I think my question was just whether or not is there going to be, or is there anticipated to be another round of public comment on this latest draft, or what's kind of the sort of next anticipated milestone for the 2040 version?
Is it the question for me?
Oh, sorry, for the staff.
Currently, our intention is to submit this current version as a final version for approval, pending some major issue or concern. We feel that we've gone through multiple iterations of open comments and adding in community feedback. And at one point, we need to move forward to document so we can start taking advantage of all of the great ideas in there.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else for right now? Okay. The next regularly scheduled meetings we have, thanks to Rebecca's note to me, is February 4th and February 18th. So I don't know if there is a desire of staff to have either of those particular dates be when we take this up again. The staff care.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, this is Rebecca speaking. We're
That's
having
okay.
just a momentary problem, but I see that Sarah is joining us now.
Okay.
Our intent is to
Introduce yourself, Sarah. Just want to make sure
Coming through.
for the record.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. It is our intent to talk to the city council over the next couple of weeks to see how they want to proceed with endorsing the document. So I'll have a better answer on that for you at the next meeting. So I'm presuming it might be 2 meetings before it gets taken up again, but I am at this point speculating.
Okay. And as a reminder to the board from me, the comprehensive plan is we are the board that is the adopting board under state law, and the council's endorsement is understand it. Just that it's an appreciation and a recognition of the vote that this board has taken, and it is not something that is required under state law. That's correct, right? That hasn't changed since last time, Sarah?
Correct.
Okay. So let's do this then. If we're gonna give them some time to think about the degree to which they will endorse our approval of this, do we want to push this to the 218 meeting? Give them some time? I'm hearing no comment, so I'm going to say yes. So the chair will move to continue discussion of Summer Vision to the February 18th meeting. seconded by the clerk. We'll take a roll call vote. The chair votes aye.
Sam votes aye.
Amelia votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
All right, we'll take this up again on 2/18. Thank you all. Next agenda item is the representative to the CPC. This is something we have discussed at least a few meetings prior to this. Amelia is the current CPC representative. I was the representative for a number of years, I want to say 4 or 5 or 6 years. And now it is time for someone else to jump in. I've spoken about it in some detail, as has Amelia, to talk about what the requirements and the expected responsibility will be for the CPC representative. It's about 1 meeting a month, and it involves some pretty interesting stuff in the way that we as a community choose to spend money on basically making summer a little better place. So I would like to, they've got a big meeting coming up, I think in February is their first real one. So I'd like to see who of you would like to take on that role, and I think it's a 2-year term. John, how do you feel about it, my friend? I think it'd be fantastic.
I'm definitely intrigued by it. I'm just a little bit concerned about the necessary time commitment, and that's the main concern that I have.
Yeah, I will say this, it really is not that big of a time commitment until kind of the end of the year, the last 2 meetings of the year, when you actually, or last 3, when you hear the presentations and you vote on allocation. The rest of them are pretty straightforward. Like I said, it's 1 night a month, and we under the statute we're required to have a representative. So right now I'm kicked for at least another term. Amelia has to be off, and so I think we're kind of at a critical time where one of you all needs to jump in.
Sure, I'll toss my head in the ring, Chairman Capuano.
Okay, so let's do this then. The chair nominates Jahan to be the planning board representative to the Community Preservation Committee, seconded by Sam. Take a roll call vote. Chair votes aye.
Sam votes aye and says thank you.
Amelia votes aye. Thank you.
Jahan, do you want to vote on on your appointment?
Have we got an abstention?
I'll take an abstention. Jahan votes to take an abstention.
Jahan abstains, and Rob?
And Rob votes aye.
Okay, with 4 votes in support, 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, I am counting, and 1 abstention. Congratulations to Jahan, who is now the new representative to the CPC from the planning board, ex officio. Enjoy your time and let us know what the applications and the projects are going to be that you are going to be entertaining, because I always like to see where we go on that. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. With that wraps up our other business, and the only other item on our agenda is 101 to 153 South Street. So at this time, I think it's looking at my Gucci, it's about that time that Amelia needs to recuse herself.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Have a good night. See you in a couple of weeks.
Very good. Thank you.
Bye. Okay. We will now be taking up 101 to 153 South Street, which is a master plan special permit that we have discussed in quite some detail over a number of months, taking into account the staff report, as well as both oral and written testimony from the community. So it's my understanding that the applicant has some updates on a number of aspects of the application, including the community benefits agreement and the covenant with the city. So at this time, I'd like to invite the applicant to be unmuted and to address the board with what they deem important, and we can have a discussion.
Mr. Chair, this is Rebecca speaking. I am going to unmute John Fenton. And Mr. Fenton, if you'd like to indicate other people that would like to speak, I'm happy to unmute them as well.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that there are questions on traffic, we have a Pat from VHB standing by, and also legal questions, Matt from Nutter, McLennan and Fish standing by as well. And I'd like them to be unmuted. Kevin Griffin also, I think, would address some problems if we get into some issues, I should say, if we get into questions about infrastructure. But other than that, and my partner, Rob Dickey, I think it would be helpful if he was also unmuted.
This is Rebecca speaking. Everyone has been unmuted. We do ask that everybody try to keep themselves self-muted until it's time for them to speak.
So I believe, we're here having completed the tasks that were laid out for us in regards to a couple of documents that had not been completed previously. There were 2 documents that were requested by the board to finalize, and also there were some questions about mobility management that I believe have been addressed by planning staff, or may be addressed here separately by planning staff. The 2 documents that were requested was really a developer covenant that defines the scope of the project and the development contributions to the city. Also, it was requested that we complete an agreement with the Union Square Neighborhood Council, which is less of a community benefits agreement and a little bit more of a letter of commitment on our parts to collaborate going forward. Many of the items that are typically included in a community benefits agreement are also included in the zoning now, since it was approved and upgraded, and also are in conditions to our master plan approval. Some of the issues that we have found agreement on with the neighborhood council had to do with commitments to diversity and fair hiring practices, going the extra mile with affordable housing to the extent possible. We'll work with the community to go through our plan and our mix. Also, in terms of green roofs, we have lab buildings. There's not a lot of room for green roofs, but we're going to work with them to see what we can do. These buildings are all going to be LEED Platinum and at a great cost are upgraded to that level. So we had many meetings with the Union Square Neighborhood Council and made great progress. And I think both of us feel satisfied to have this agreement in place at this time. As importantly, we have a development covenant in place that's been signed by both parties. And this document also defines the scope of the development plan, which basically consists of 1.35 million square feet, 1 million of which is intended to be lab office buildings that will employ, up to 4,000 new people in Somerville. We're hopeful that Somerville residents get some of those jobs, many of them. But it'll also consist of 350 apartment units on this 6.5 acre site, 2 acres of which are being granted to the public realm for new roads, about half of it, and civic space, the other half. So there's a win-win there in terms of, I think everyone knows that Boynton Yards has long been an underutilized area that has seemingly resisted redevelopment. And now, as part of this covenant, we have a infrastructure plan that's in place that will serve to upgrade the entirety of Boynton Yards with civic spaces, new roads, and utilities. We worked out an agreement whereby our development will pay sort of a pro rata share of those costs, but also prime the pump by making over $15 million worth of improvements to the infrastructure as part of the first phase of our development. And is splitting the costs with the city basically on a 70-30 basis. New developers will also be obligated as they come to participate in a similar fashion. All of that has been worked out as well. We've also defined the level of commitment that the developer will provide in respect to other community benefits, which include, $10 a square foot for affordable housing, which is over $10 million on the commercial development, and close to $3 million for job retention and training for Somerville residents. The project will generate well over $20 million in community benefits over the next 5 years, as well as new tax revenues and jobs. So we're very pleased to be in this position, to have found a place where we can move forward and created a map and a model for others to follow. I mean, we hope that the development community, and I think we see signs of it already, will also jump in and make this transformation a reality. I think that's about what I have to say on that. I don't know if there are questions from the board or others.
There are no questions from me. I appreciate the work that you all have done to get to this place. It's something that we've been looking for a while. I know there were details that need to be hashed out, and I'm really glad that we are in a position where we have a covenant that brings us closer to some of the goals that we've got in creating development that works for the city in a broader scope. So thank you for the presentation. I don't know if there are questions from the other members of the board right now, but I would welcome you all to ask them or make comments. Sam?
Yeah, just a quick comment. Echoing thanks to a lot of different people who are involved. I think this has made some good progress over the last few months, especially to the neighborhood association and the applicant for working together and trying to maximize the benefit there. I think that, to your point, is hopefully will continue to be a model for other projects moving forward.
Thank you.
Has anyone else got comments? I know Dan is still out there, I think, and wanted to go over some of the amended conditions. I don't know if Dan wants to be unmuted and make a brief overview now or not.
Hello, Mr. Chair. This is Senior Planner Dan Bartman from the Planning and Zoning Division. I can do that now or after you all have gone through the findings considerations, either way.
Okay. Well, the findings, I think, I would like to discuss the findings and determine that a finding has been made once we go over the conditions to make sure that our concerns that would go towards making those findings are encapsulated into the conditions. I think that logically needs to come first. Is let's see what the conditions are and make sure that they meet the requirements of us making the finding.
Understood. A few members of the board, along with inspectional services, who has to review these conditions as the build out occurs, requested for further clarification on the language of specifically the transportation mitigation conditions. There were 5 of them identified, and then actually 2 down that were labeled in the mobility section are also transportation mitigation. All of this is related to street improvements. So I met with the transportation division representatives and asked them to clarify, for instance, references to the city's conceptual designs and what that meant. And so they provided additional language, and I'd like to read those into the record with your permission. So the first one is that the applicant, the original language was the applicant shall construct and implement the city's conceptual design for the conversion of South Street to one-way eastbound between Harding and Medford Streets. New language will be South Street between Harding Street and Medford Street must be improved as a one-way eastbound thoroughfare with a two-way bicycle facility on one side of the street, period. With final design must be approved by relevant city departments, period. The second one, I believe in order from the second staff memo, is that the applicant will design and implement a redesign of the intersection of South Street and Harding Streets, period. The design should connect the proposed two-way protected bike facilities further east on South Street and the proposed one-way pair of protected bike facilities further west on South Street, period. The final design shall be approved by the Director of Mobility. The new language will be the intersection of South Street and Harding Street must be improved to, at minimum, interconnect the required bicycle facilities of each segment of South Street, period. Final intersection design must be approved by relevant city departments, period. Next is the applicant will construct and implement the city's conceptual design for safety improvements at the intersection of Medford and South Streets. New language would be the intersection of Medford and South Streets must be improved to, at minimum, interconnect the required bicycle facility of South Street with the city's design for improvements to Medford Street and related pedestrian safety improvements, period. Final intersection design must be approved by relevant city departments. Next is the applicant will construct and implement the city's conceptual design for safety improvements at the intersection of Ward and Medford Streets, period. New language would be the intersection of Medford Street and Ward Street must be improved to interconnect the city's design for improvements to Medford Street and related pedestrian safety improvements, period. Final intersection design must be approved by relevant city departments, period. Next is the applicant will design and implement a redesign of the intersection of Ward and Harding Streets that takes into consideration the design of the extension of Harding Street to Thoroughfare 1. Design to be approved by the Director of Mobility. New language would be the intersection of Ward Street and Harding Street must be improved in a manner that permits the later extension of Harding Street northward, period. Final intersection design must be approved by relevant city departments. And then the two that were in the mobility section are portions of South Street and Windsor Street within the development site as shown on XXX must be designed to include a curb separated sidewalk level protected bikeway or substantial equivalent. I will stop there. There's a second section to that I'll address in a moment. The new language for this condition would be the northern side of South Street and the eastern side of Windsor Street must be improved with a protected bikeway or substantial equivalent, period. Final design must be approved by the relevant city departments. The second sentence or the last sentence of that original condition is proposed to be separated out and stated alone by itself in that Boynton Yards Land Co. LLC or their successor in interest must maintain any sidewalk level protected bicycle facility included but not limited to snow clearance, debris removal, and the replacement of markings and delineators as needed for any portions of the facility along the frontage of the development site that are not at street level, period. And then the last one is the intersection of South and Windsor Streets shall be designed with a protected or dedicated bike intersection treatments or similar, designed to be approved by the Director of Mobility. And the new language would be the intersection of South Street and Windsor Street must be improved with at least a protected or dedicated bicycle intersection treatments. Final intersection design must be approved by relevant city departments. So you can see where lots of references to conceptual designs were really related to how the bicycle facilities all interconnect in those streets, and so they provided clarity in the language on what that actually was referencing. And that's the extent of those clarifications.
And thank you very much. I think they incorporate what some of our concerns were. I think it makes the document read, slightly more, more perfectly. Knowing fully well that this is a master plan, and I look forward to the day when we can get going on individual special permits. I do notice that there is someone who's listed as an attendee with her hand raised. I want to remind folks that we are not taking new testimony this evening. We have had public testimony that has closed, and it's not my understanding that her hand has gone down. Okay, great. So going back to what I was saying, I just wanted to thank Dan for perfecting the document, for making it kind of more comprehensive for where we all want this master plan to go, that it is a 30,000 foot plan, that once we get down to individual parcels, we will be dealing with individual special permits. And I look forward to the discussion when those come before this board. I specifically want to call out the development team and staff for their long work in getting us to where we are today. This is, to me, a huge step forward in the improvement of a neighborhood in Somerville that has been underused for decades. It's something that this city has been trying to improve since I was a kid, if not even before I was born. And we're finally at a place where we can make this city a little bit nicer for an area that's going to be a huge improvement for the community, for that specific neighborhood, for our place in Greater Boston, with conditions and a covenant that work for not just that neighborhood, but also for the city as a whole. And I just want to commend the applicant and staff for getting us to a place where we can take a vote this evening to move this master plan forward, so we can leave this area improve in as soon as the near future as we can. So with all of that having been said, I don't know if anyone else on the board would like to comment or have any additional questions before we move forward. Rob?
Yeah, I have a brief question. As we get closer to a vote, I guess I have two. One question: what are we voting on? Is it is there a written document that I should be referencing? And part of the reason why I'm asking is
It is
like everything that Dan said. I don't know where to find what I just heard, because I like.
So we've got. Does staff want to point Rob to the correct document? Because ultimately what we will have to do is vote to make 7 specific findings based on the documentation, on the discussion that we've had, also the testimony that we've received, and the staff and the applicant's response to that. But I leave it to staff to address Rob's question with a little bit more specificity.
Mr. Chair, excuse me, this is Dan again. There are findings that must be made to issue the permit, and which are separate from the conditions. I will send you the conditions language, and our understanding is that the chair's prepared to go through the findings himself. So I will just send you the new drafted conditions language.
All right. Does anyone else got any comments or questions before I move forward with addressing the findings that this board must make?
May I just ask one other question? So I had a few suggestions that I wanted to put forward with respect to conditions, and I guess I'm asking Mr. Chair, when is the right time to make those suggestions?
Are they conditions to the master plan, or will they be conditions to specific parcels?
To the master plan.
And now would be the time to raise those.
Okay, great. Okay, then with your permission, I'll go ahead. So one piece that I wanted to bring forward was with respect to phasing of the master plan special permit. And in the staff memo dated October 9th, 2020, it describes under phasing condition number 2, language surrounding a 20-foot, excuse me, I'm tired, a 20,000 square foot community center, et cetera. And I guess I wanted to start there. I had been chatting, with the planning folks and the planning staff to make sure I understood this a little better, and then kind of talking with some of the folks just out in the community to understand if I'm getting this. But as written in the October 9th memo, my understanding is that this is essentially saying that the community center space would need to be provided by the completion of phase 3, which would by definition then be that the phasing of the community center space would have to occur in one of the lab buildings. Now, I should say, I should qualify all of this by saying, I know there's also been a lot of chatter among people in the community that their number one priority is actually they'd like to see an amendment to the zoning on this, but I want to put that aside because that's not really something we have control over. That's really not what's in front
That's
of
also
us.
not before us tonight, Rob. What's before us is the master plan that's been presented to us over the period of months.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
So
Correct.
I'm speaking to the condition under phasing 2.
You can,
Number 2.
yes, yeah.
I'm sorry, somebody speaking?
Sorry, this is Rebecca speaking. Mr. Fenton, I'm going to mute you unless unless you're asking to be recognized by Chair Capuano.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
All right.
And so in any event, I was going to make a suggestion that rather than sort of requiring that this community center space be provided by the completion of phase 3, I was going to make a suggestion that it be provided by the completion of phase 4, which would allow it to be located within the proposed residential building as opposed to one of the lab buildings, which would further allow it to be located proximate to either civic space C2 or civic space C3, however the development team ultimately decides to submit that through the later phases of the design and site plan review process. So Dan, I'm sorry, I don't understand. Am I supposed to read all of this, or do you want to display it on the screen?
One of us could read them. Yeah, one of us could either read them for you or display them. I believe Rebecca and I both have your email from earlier.
Yeah, well, if you don't mind.
It's my understanding, Dan, that over the span of developing this master plan, there was a discussion had and probably a community process that would have talked about the phasing of what goes where and why. So if you want to reference that as well, I don't know. I don't want, basically, here's what I don't want is now at the 11th hour when we're getting ready to take a vote for things that have been discussed and had a community process engaged in for probably the better part of at least a year, if not longer. We come in and say, you know what, I actually think, this community space should come in on phase 4 instead of phase 3 when there's a reason that it is included in that phase. I just want to make sure that we're not totally screwing up something that has been in process with a wide degree of agreement right before we're about to take a vote, because I presume what's being presented to us has been done in a deliberative and thoughtful manner, and I don't want to get into a place where we're screwing up, multiple months, multiple years worth of work for questions at this stage in the game.
Mr. Chair, I don't believe that's the case with anything that Mr. Buchanan reached out to us to discuss. He did reach out directly to avoid having any kind of deliberation amongst the board members outside of a hearing. So we worked with him to address the topics that he was concerned with. I guess the one thing I'd call attention to is that the conditions are reflected in a memo that was published, almost 4.5 months ago now. So the same way that I provided clarity for some of the transportation ones, I think some of the things that we worked to write language about were Mr. Buchanan's concerns reflect the public comment and the work that has progressed over that same time period. It is not my opinion that any of these things are something that would blow up the project, quote unquote, and that they are refinements on previous conditions. And I can tell you that our thought, one of our thought processes about the community center was about when it occurred at the time, and it was reflected in the condition that Melissa proposed in her original staff memo, or in her second staff memo. And since then, we have received public feedback about where that is very important to the community, and it being located in closer proximity or inside one of the residential buildings is actually of very high value. And we agree, especially based off of the public input. So I don't see any of these having that level of concern that you just expressed.
I appreciate that, Dan, because I don't want to minimize Rob's concerns. I just want to put them in context with what they are in relation to what it is that we'll be considering for a vote. Sam, I see Sam.
In terms of considering these, would we like to discuss one by one, or do we want to hear the full slate and then discuss, or how would we like to approach that?
Well, I guess the question is how much more have you how many other questions have you got? Would you like this addressed now, or would you like to have everything addressed? Because we won't be making specific votes on the conditions. What we'll be doing is taking those conditions and applying them to seven different findings that we're going to have to make. So it's a kind of a totality of what we have been presented to be able to make that specific finding.
Mr. Chair, this is Rebecca speaking. I would also like to note that the applicant and their counsel might want to be recognized in order to be able to provide some input as well now that the discussion has been opened. So I'm happy to do that when you're ready.
I would love to recognize them. Yes, please.
Thank you.
Well, if I may, so I'll be candid, I'm not clear on the process. So I'm just a little confused on sort of what's being asked. So my hope was to make to have a discussion on 3 pieces. One was on the community center space. One was on the design of a pedestrian bridge, which I will note is referenced in the neighborhood council's agreement with the developer and makes reference to a condition in the master plan special permit, which as best as I can tell does not exist. And I thought it would be a nice time to rectify that. And then the other topic that I wanted to talk about was the relationship of the two building 2 and building 3A, if I have those numbered correctly.
What I'd like to do is recognize the applicant and council to be able to address, at least at this stage, Rob's question about the phasing of the community center.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Rebecca speaking. Mr. Fenton and Mr. Snell are now unmuted and can speak.
Okay, this is John Fenton. We have had discussions about the community center at great length with staff and with the community group and the Union Square Neighborhood Council. And it seemed in the best interest of everyone that, you know, a community center wouldn't be located inside of a lab building where other activities, you know, would not be synergistic, and that it would be more likely located within the 4th phase of the project, and where there would be better synergies. However, there was also a very strong sentiment amongst the community that they wanted it to be something that they had input into, and we talked about collaborating over some period of time before the 4th phase of the development was completed to come to a conclusion that would address as many people's concerns and needs and desires as possible. So it was my understanding that the language in the approval was going to be altered to address that, and I'm gonna hand this over to Matt Snell now to talk a little bit more specifically about that.
Hello, this is Matt Snell of Nutter, McLennan and Fish, counsel for the applicant. We spoke with staff a couple of weeks ago as we were negotiating the covenant about this condition in particular, number 2 under phasing. And the first thing I think that we had suggested was that it should say, rather than provided by the completion of phase 3, it would say identified by the completion of phase 3. And that's both for the community center and the creative arts and enterprises uses, because obviously the phase 4 building is intended to have the community center at this time, although as John said, there's potential to move that around with community input going forward. And obviously the last building, which won't be done in phase 3, will also have arts and creative enterprise space. So we had suggested to staff to change provided by to identified by. And I think that we had agreement on that during that call, although I know that Mr. Bartman wasn't on that call. So whether that made it through to the revised conditions, I know that Ms. Lewis was on. And I think that would answer the question that Mr. Buchanan was raising, at least in part.
Mr. Chair, this is Dan, if I may.
Go ahead, Dan, sorry.
The condition language that we worked on with Mr. Buchanan allows for the community center to be provided in phase 4 in either building 4A or 4C without having to amend the master plan. after you approve it. And so the language that was proposed by the applicant actually would cause that to happen. The version that you can see on your screen here would allow them to still proceed forward without having to amend the master plan to deliver in phase 4. I will call attention to the fact that if we delete the original text of that was provided in the first memo, we need to address also the arts and creative enterprise space, which is the language that we worked on with Mr. Buchanan in the second section at the bottom. If you'd like me to, I can explain the second half also.
Do you think that explanation is necessary for understanding the condition?
Not beyond a reading of it, but I could do it in simpler terms than unless you all just want to read this.
Let's distill it to humans.
All of the A space, arts and creative enterprise space, must be provided by the completion of phase 3, but it would be at the applicant's own choosing where all of that A space goes. So that would be maintaining the functionality of the original condition, but we made sure to be explicit in all of the buildings that are included in those phases, and that the applicant has self-determination in where that goes, and that all we want to see is it identified on the site plans that will follow in the next phase of permitting.
Rob, does that address your concern on that?
Yeah, exactly. So, the idea here would be to allow the community center space to be provided in the residential building, which, in my mind, and in talking with several folks, would provide. Frankly, there's going to be approximately 330 households in the phase 4 buildings, 20% of which will be affordable. It just seems to me that if a community center space is going to be located somewhere in the master plan special permit area, that would be probably the building or buildings where there will be the most synergies and the space will be used.
Sam?
2 questions on that. I know there are pretty precise usage requirements for square footage. Does this, by taking this out of one of the lab buildings and moving it to the residential, does that mess with our ratios on square footage? That would be a question for Dan, I would guess.
No, the ratios, I'm sorry, through the chair, no, all of the ratios are done at a master plan scale. So if it's located in one building versus the other, it maintains the ratio.
But on a practical level, this is probably just my ignorance, but on a practical level, if we're moving this into a residential building, is that not going to reduce the amount of residential use?
Through the chair, the Boynton Yards district actually has no limitations on dwelling units or height. So, in theory, that mass, the volume of building that would be occupied by the community center can be mitigated.
Great, that's a perfect answer. Thank you.
And if I may, my understanding was the intent was that would be storefront commercial of some type, no matter what, whether it's community center space or some other commercial space. So it's pushing from one building to the other. A swap.
That's correct. There's not an all residential building type permitted in the district, so it would at least be a general building with ground floor commercial otherwise.
Does that address folks' concerns with the community space issue?
Mr. Chair, this is Rebecca speaking. I would like to take note that Mr. Fenton has indicated he wants to speak again.
Okay, let's recognize Mr. Fenton.
Mr. Fenton, I've unmuted you.
Thank you. frankly, I'm getting a little bit confused. I mean, I think what you folks are saying is that you'd like to have the community center space in the residential building. And I think that's very possible and a likely outcome. I'm not, and I don't have an objection to that at this time. I don't have an objection to the language that's been added either. So from my perspective, I believe, if I understand it correctly, that we're fine with the change.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, if I may, this is Matt Snell.
Yes.
Again, I just wanted to ask one question. Is it the intent that the arts and enterprise use in this condition would only be in buildings 1, 2, and 3, well, 3A and 3D? It would not be in the residential building? And if so, I just want to confirm that that's correct.
I didn't hear that. I mean,
I'd like staff to address that because the staff had the draft of the condition, and I just want to make sure that what is in the condition is what was intended to be the practical application of what you wrote.
Mr. Chair, you'll notice the original condition had all of the A space being delivered by the completion of phase 3, and that the rewrite of it maintains that it will be provided by the completion of phase 3.
I think that's okay.
Yeah. Thank you. What else?
Mr.
Yes.
Chair, this is Rebecca speaking. I just wanted to interject very briefly to please remind everyone before speaking to identify themselves.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yes, please all do that. We're on video, and many of you are not, so it's difficult for the record to be able to identify who's been speaking. So in the future, if you could, Rebecca makes an excellent point. Thank you.
This is just John Fenton speaking
Yes.
once again on this matter, just to be abundantly clear. We expect to have ACE space throughout the project, and you know, some of it may be in the fourth phase. I don't think all of it will be there, and I don't think the intention is that all of it would be there. It's just that it needs to be identified by the time of that project, if I understand it. So I don't believe the words that have been written indicate anything different than that, and I think we're fine with it.
Right. I look at it as must be reserved for uses, not necessarily. You know, so you can identify them at that stage and not necessarily have them up. So Rob, do you have your other 2 items for discussion that you'd like to raise at this point?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So the other item I wanted to bring up was, on a number of occasions, this group has talked about, and it's come up in the public comment, a strong interest on behalf of the community for not precluding some kind of a north-south pedestrian bridge across the tracks. In fact, the neighborhood council, in the agreement that DLJ made with the neighborhood council, it even cites such a it says, I'll quote you, "As a condition of our master plan special permit application for the project, the development team has agreed not to preclude such a pedestrian bridge connection within the limits of the project." As best as I can tell, no such condition has been drafted or appears in any of the staff memos. And so I wanted to, working with the staff, drafted some language that would effectuate that. In detail, this would include the so-called not to preclude language, such that it would not interrupt where the buildings are, but rather that if and when a pedestrian bridge is built, that it be connected or integrated with one of the two outdoor civic spaces, if it were ever to come to pass. So that was the discussion that we had that I had with the staff. So I'll put that out there and let if people want to talk or ask questions.
And what I'm looking at now is a set of two conditions that identifies two very specific civic space lots that does not preclude the inclusion of a particular bridge, does not require one, but also kind of infers that if one could be built, that it would not be prohibited by the nature of the location and design of those specific lots. Is that what I'm reading?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So Rob, I think based on the way I read that and what Dan's confirmed, that addresses your concern. I don't know if anyone else has any comments. I think it's perfectly fine to not include something that may be designed, may be infeasible at some point. We don't know, but we'd like to basically leave the option open or the possibility open for it. And I think this language does that. I don't know if the applicant wants to address the language or if other members of the board have questions or comments on this issue. And I'm going to make sure that you're not. Attorney Snell has a question mark on, and I don't know if he wants to be recognized.
Mr. Chair, this is Rebecca. I believe that Mr. Snell's, that was Mr. Snell's attempt to raise his hand for an earlier question.
Great, thank you. I do not think that we have any other discussion on this at this time. Mr. Fenton hasn't raised his hand, so it's my understanding that Mr. Fenton, now he has. I'd like to recognize Mr. Fenton to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Hi, this is John Fenton once again, and just to reiterate, the concept of having ACE space in the fourth phase is not objectionable. I can't see the language that you folks are reading, and I just want to be sure that it isn't misinterpreted to suggest that all of the AC space is in the fourth phase. We're going to be spreading it throughout the project, and I just want to be clear that that's the case. Also, we had intended and had agreed to have language in the approval or the staff report that would not preclude one side of a future pedestrian bridge to be landed on our site. There had not been any specificity to the location of that in the past. We had resisted that with our discussions with the community, and that kind of specificity had not actually come up previously. I do anticipate, that being the fourth phase, that what we see on our plan right now may not be what we come back with, and it would be the subject of a master plan change application if it did change. But we know nothing about where this pedestrian bridge might go, where it'd be appropriate for it to go on either side of the tracks. And so I'm a little uncomfortable with, other than the fact that there's presently open spaces at C3 and C2, the one in the northeast corner of our site is actually going to be conveyed to the city. for
Mr. Chair?
civic space.
Mr. Chair, this is Rebecca speaking.
Yes.
For the good of the meeting and for the benefit of Mr. Fenton, who indicated that he's not able to read the text on the screen, may I read the proposed condition language for all?
Yes, please. I think I didn't realize Mr. Fenton couldn't see what we see.
Yeah.
Mr. Fenton, I will read the text for you and for the rest of the attendees of the meeting. The condition language is very simple. It's the design of civic space lot C2 must not preclude the inclusion of a pedestrian bridge over the MBTA Fitchburg Green Line rail right-of-way. There's a second condition that is the design of civic space lot C3 must not preclude the inclusion of a pedestrian bridge over the MBTA Fitchburg / Green Line rail line right-of-way.
That's fine. That language is fine from my perspective.
We thought that you may have thought we were still talking about the discussion of the civic space that we or the community space rather that we had kind of closed discussion on. So
I was okay.
Just wanted to make sure you knew what it was that we were talking about, because I didn't
Yeah,
realize
I do.
the proposed condition. Okay. I think that addresses the issue of the pedestrian bridge, and I think Rob had one additional question that he had. So everybody's on the same page. We are moving forward onto Rob's third question, which has to do with what?
Thank you. So the third thing I wanted to raise, and I'm not sure where the page went, but if you're able to pull that up, Dan, I think it's, at least for those who can see it, I think it's easier for people to read it then. Thank you. So the third thing I wanted to just raise was as part of the master plan special permit to suggest including two very brief conditions with respect to signaling our interest and our intent with respect to design going forward, largely just to avoid the Emerald City potential outcome of citing essentially a lab building park amidst a smaller scale, mixed use neighborhood. And so these two conditions are a very high level and would and are modeled in some ways after language in the existing zoning that applies to some of the other building types, but just talks a little bit about the essentially creating either a podium facade. Thank you. A podium facade at a lower level to integrate the buildings into the neighborhood more, rather than something that kind of looks like a spaceship lands down next to some 2, 3, 4 story buildings. So Dan, I might ask Dan if you have a few words to characterize what I had written here that is more articulate than the way I've said it.
Mr. Chair, may I?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, please.
These are similar language to the requirement for how a podium tower works, a different building type than what they've proposed, but it's the same language. So a podium can, the appearance of a podium can be created through simple architectural articulation that is horizontal across the building. So this is really limited to architectural design rather than necessarily changing the massing of any of those buildings. So that's where it highlights that to include horizontal articulation such as a cornice or other molding, or that the upper stories must be stepped back from the facade of the podium. And notice that it also doesn't say how far. So it provides the applicant options when they propose these two buildings to either just architecturally express a 4 to 6 story podium so that it better integrates with its surroundings, or of their own choice to decide to step back the upper stories after somewhere between 4 and 6 stories. So there's a lot of actual choice involved in this one on a means of achieving it.
Mr. Chair, this is Rebecca speaking. If you'd like, I can read these into the record as well.
Yes, please. I just want to make sure the applicant is on the same page as the board when we're discussing the conditions that will apply to their master plan special permit.
Yes, Mr. Chair, understood. The first condition would be that building 2 must be designed with a 4 to 6 story podium facing Windsor Street. The top of the podium facade must either include horizontal articulation, such as a cornice or other molding, or the upper stories must be stepped back from the facade of the podium. The second condition language is building 3A must be designed with a 4 to 6 story podium facing Harding and South Streets. The top of the podium facade must either include horizontal articulation, such as a cornice or other molding, or the upper stories must be stepped back from the facade of the podium. Mr. Chair, I'm also noticing that Mr. Fenton has indicated he'd like to speak again. Please let me know when you'd like me to recognize him, or when you'd like to recognize him.
I'd like to recognize Mr. Fenton as soon as you are done addressing the board, Rebecca.
Mr. Fenton, you are currently unmuted.
Thank you. I believe that the buildings that we have in our plan reflect stepping down as this language is indicated. You know, at this time, I don't know how we are supposed to just agree to that, though. And the other thing, I just have to go back. This is very confusing. What's going on here? I have to say. But I also need to point out that my colleagues seem to indicate that the language that is being submitted for the ACA and the community space seems to indicate that it could be read that none of the ACA space is going to be located in the fourth building, and that it all has to be provided before we get to the fourth building, which is not the intent, was not our intent. So I don't know if that's what Mr. Buchanan's intent is, or of Dan's intent, frankly, because I still haven't really seen that language. I have seen the language on the buildings here, and frankly, I didn't know that we were going to be designing buildings at this meeting. We were getting a master plan approved so that we could move forward with site plan permits as we got to that point. You know, we've been trying to understand the conditions of this meeting and what conditions would be posed on us as part of this meeting for quite some time. And, you know, it's disturbing, surprising to me that we'd be here with these changes and not having any knowledge of them or ability to understand them before this vote. I mean, we've been at this for a long time. So I'm a little bit frustrated, to be honest. So I would like to ask Mr. Buchanan or to Dan if they could clarify for me the language as it relates to putting ACE space and when it needs to be completed and where it needs to go. Because I'm frankly confounded right now by this.
Let me be clear before we move forward. It was my understanding that these concerns had been discussed prior to them being raised tonight for discussion with the planning board. If that was not the case, I do not expect this board is in a position to take a vote on conditions that the applicant has not had a chance to review, particularly with the advice of counsel. I would not want that to move forward without a discussion with the applicant on whether you're willing to accept the language that's being proposed. Now, the board is in a position at any point prior to making a vote to add conditions and take a vote on those conditions. The question is whether the applicant is willing to move forward once those conditions have been added and voted on by the board. However, that's not the way I choose to run this board. I'd like everybody to be on the same page to the best of my ability before we move forward with the vote. And if Mr. Fenton is saying that he's not comfortable with the language at this point, or at least would like some additional clarification by discussion with staff, with the advice of counsel, I would like to afford Mr. Fenton the opportunity to be able to do that. That doesn't mean that the board will not impose those conditions when it elects to make a vote, but I do think that the applicant has the right to consider what it is that the board will be expecting in this master plan special permit. That's part one. Part two, I view a master plan special permit to be not only a 30,000-foot document, but also a document that describes how those buildings work in relation to the neighborhood and to the plan itself. So while we're not designing buildings as we just raised in that last proposed condition, what we're talking about in the way I view those is how those buildings relate to the plan as a whole, which is the concept of a master plan special permit. And we might be talking about particular cornices and things. We're really talking about the size and the scope of those buildings as it relates to the immediate vicinity that those buildings are designed to be placed in. So what I'd like to do is have some more discussion on that third condition. I do not think it's appropriate to take a vote this evening with the applicant feeling uncertain as to the conditions and what those conditions will mean for the application. I want the applicant to know what it is that the board is going to be voting on. And if the applicant is comfortable with those changes, that's good, obviously. If the applicant is not comfortable with those changes and the board still wants to move forward with voting on the proposed conditions and making those findings that include the conditions that we've added, that's also going to be the circumstance. But I don't want to move forward with Mr. Fenton saying, I don't know what these changes mean as it relates to my permit. So what I'd like right now is for at least Dan to kind of discuss what it is that we're talking about. And I'd like the board to make a few additional discussion points if it finds itself necessary to do so. But I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. It was my impression that these proposed conditions were discussed already without necessarily going to the full board yet. It was at least raised with the applicant. It doesn't sound like that was necessarily the case, and that's not, I think, an appropriate way to make a vote on a master plan. So I'd like staff to be able to address some of the questions that Mr. Fenton has raised, either at this, if you think it's appropriate, or offline once we move forward from this evening's meeting. But I think this needs to be squared away, and I think it needs to be clear because I don't think it's appropriate or fair to move forward when there are still questions of what proposed conditions mean as it relates to the applicant's master plan application.
Mr. Chair, if I might respond to those, I can address any one of the questions that were raised individually related to specific conditions, but you might recall that we have to serve as the staff to the planning board as well. And so when we were approached by Mr. Buchanan to address concerns that he identified based on the public feedback, we provided that service and worked together to write those conditions that addressed his concerns and to facilitate conversation outside of a public hearing between a board member and a applicant would be illegal. So that conversation did not happen until we were at the public hearing and these could be introduced by Mr. Buchanan because they were not staff related recommended changes and were specifically identified by one of your board members and he wanted to address things that were identified over the course of the original hearing and the public comments that were received. And so we facilitated that process.
And what I don't want to do, and I didn't mean to imply it by what I said, and it sounds like you may have taken it that way, is I do not want my comments in any way to disparage what staff has done in the preparation of this evening and in the work getting to where we are today. I think you guys have done a phenomenal job in working with the applicant, working with this board, working with our members. I did not mean to imply, and I'm sorry if it came across that way, that you did do something that you should have done or we would have expected you to have done. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I would like is for the opportunity for the applicant to sit with these changes to see if what Rob, and I think based on what I think the consensus of the board is, but I'd like to be able to make sure, is that moving forward, when we are ready for a vote, the applicant understands what it is that we for, that the conditions are what the board intends for the master plan's conditions to incorporate, and that the staff kind of facilitate that understanding. And if there's not an understanding, if the that we've had many circumstances where the applicant is not willing to accept certain conditions, and we deal with that either by voting on an application and imposing conditions that an applicant is not willing to accept, or working with the applicant, usually through staff between meetings, but sometimes during meetings, where we can get conditions to a mutually agreeable construction. So that's what I'm hoping for, and I didn't mean to imply that Dan or you or anybody at the staff level did anything that was not proper or not expected. I think you guys have done just an absolutely stellar job with this, and so that's what the intent behind my comments were.
Understood, Mr. Chair. Thank you. That was not, my comments were not to imply that you implied that we did anything improper either. I guess I could call attention to the fact that we have not, through the edit that we worked on with Mr. Buchanan, is that the language of the condition originally proposed related to the community center and the A space was not changed on when the A space was delivered, and the staff is not proposing to change that. That was maintained from the original condition that was submitted in September, and the specificity was added was for the applicant's sake on all of the to identify all of the buildings through the end of phase 3, and to make sure that they understood that they are in charge of where they decide on their own where that A space goes throughout the extent of phase 3. Not only phase 3, I mean all of the phases through the completion of phase 3, and the That was the original language, and that is what the revision also says.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may, Matt Snell again.
I'm sorry?
May I respond to that?
Yes, just identify yourself for the call.
Yeah, this is Matt Snell, counsel for the applicant. We met with staff. Unfortunately, Mr. Barton wasn't there 2 weeks ago, and we raised that the condition that was formally in the document that indicated that the community center and arts and creative space must be provided by completion of phase 3 wasn't entirely correct, because there can be, as part of the project, a space in building 4. And we had suggested to staff when we met that it would be better to say identified by the completion of phase 3, meaning that it would either be in buildings 1, 2, or 3, or we would identify the remainder of the A space that might be in building 4. And we thought that was agreed with. We had met with, when we were working on the covenant, with Ms. Lewis and with Mr. Proakis. And that may just not have gone forward. But I think our concern with the language here is that it appears that the A space all has to be in buildings 1, 2, 3A, 3B. And that in fact may not be the way it finally shakes out. And I would ask Mr. Fenton or Mr. Griffin to confirm that that's the case. And if so, I think we would just say the first part of that condition, I think, works related to the community space, but we would identify and reserve the space by the end of phase 3 rather than provide it.
Mr. Chair, this is Rebecca speaking. I wanted to note that Mr. Dickey and Mr. Fenton have indicated that they want to speak and would like to be recognized.
I'd like to recognize Mr. Dickey first, because he has not yet spoken.
Mr. Dickey, you are unmuted and you just need to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Mr. Chair. So I was essentially going to say the same thing that Matt Snell said, and try to, I think it's in our interest as, to move this forward tonight if we can. So I think kind of rolling back to the discussion that Matt just reviewed, I think we can get through that point, would be my hope. And I think as and Mr. Fenton and I can, as partners, work through that and agree to conditions around the ACE space and the community space and the language there. With regard to the next point that was made, I think the confusion that we have is that in the, we're all new to the zoning here, and the master plan is governed by form-based zoning and building typology. So we have spent a lot of time with staff going through the different sites here and the building typology. And tonight was the first time we've heard about specific design criteria related to buildings 2 and 3 as it related to the last, the last condition. So I think it would be very helpful to understand what the intent of those conditions are. And are they consistent with the form-based zoning? For instance, and this is a question, building 2 is a lab typology project as submitted. What is it about, what is the intent of the board or the condition in adding additional information there that, in terms of getting the master plan approved? Because that is certainly new information to us tonight. And I think if we could better understand it, we could agree to it, but I don't know that we can agree to design criteria around something that goes above and beyond the typology. So that's a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dickey. I'd like to recognize Sam before we move on to Mr. Fenton.
This would be a question for staff. At this stage, is this condition redundant of what would be required with more specific approvals down the road? Do we actually gain anything by this?
Through the chair, I can address both of these questions. Such a condition does not interfere with the building type designation or the standards of the building type. There's no upper story step back required of any of our high-rise buildings in the high-rise district, even though this language exists on the podium tower, for example. And in its most simplest form, achieving this requires a horizontal molding across at the top of the 4th floor. So it has no impact on floor area or volume of the building unless the applicant chose to adjust the volume of the building, which the condition also allows that freedom as well. So my opinion is it does not interfere with the dimensions or the definition of the type of building type permitted for either of those lots. What it provides is advanced notice so that the applications that do come in reflect the desire of the board so that you are not imposing such a condition after they have already proposed a building that does not do this when they reach site plan approval. If you recall, site plan approval requires approval if the building is compliant. You can add conditions to mitigate impacts. Some of those may be architectural, but that would be, for instance, if this decision was made later, the building could be far along in its design, and such a change to the architectural design or the massing of the building would have a more profound impact at that stage of the game compared to now. So it's probably better to recognize this as an early warning, especially as I said, the most simplest version involves a molding and no change to the floor area or massing of the building. And I would defer to Mr. Buchanan on what his objective was in proposing these conditions to the rest of you.
Thank you, Dan. That's really helpful.
May I be recognized, Mr. Chair? Thank you. So, and I'll just say this as a statement about all of these. You know, my intent was not to throw a wrench in the works at the 11th hour. We have met on this particular proposal a number of times. We've had open public comment. We've received those comments, both written and verbally. We've heard presentations from the applicant, and we've had the opportunity to ask questions. But at no point in time have we honestly had the opportunity to go through the conditions that are going to be applied at a very specific level. I have raised all of these topics multiple times in previous meetings, and so if it feels new tonight, then perhaps not everybody was as part of those meetings or on those phone calls, but these are not new. I have been raising them. In fact, the pedestrian bridge is something I raised the very first time during the very first neighborhood meeting, which goes back probably 6 months. So I don't want anybody to get the impression that this is an 11th hour change. Everything that I've got here, I'm putting forward in the open to comply with the open meeting law. So I don't, if I had tried to do this, you know, via emails or some sort of a back channel process, that would not actually be appropriate or legal. So I'm bringing all of this forward, throwing it out there. These are my suggestions. I understand if people are not supportive, that's completely fine. But I'm just doing the job that I'm on the planning board to do. So I just wanted to make that point.
What I think we're at now, I think the board and the applicant, at least in staff, I think we're at least on the same page when it comes to these. The last question comes to the specificity of the last set of conditions that were proposed relating to the two buildings. And I don't want to put words in Rob's mouth, but what I think, and I think I tried to summarize it, and I'm not sure if I did it appropriately, Rob, so correct me if I'm wrong, was that we don't want buildings that are incongruous to their abutting spaces. Rebecca always, when she was on the board, she would have these wonderfully beautiful ways of phrasing conditions and concerns about the way buildings relate to each other. And I think she would say that she would want these buildings to be respectful of the in scale as relating to the surrounding streets and properties. And without getting too deep into the woods on cornices and setbacks and things like that, I think that's what you're trying to say, and I think that's what this board has wanted to do when it came to those properties. And tell me, Rob, if that's an appropriate way of phrasing what it is that you are intending with those proposed conditions.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't answer the question. I just sort of went on a tangent. You have characterized it correctly. So the intent here, again, is really the zoning provides for putting these lab buildings down in Boynton Yards. As I have said in previous meetings, we are locating a lab park, a lab office park, in an otherwise very mixed use, dense residential neighborhood, in addition to low scale commercial, in addition to parcels that are zoned for the future to be mid-rise, although they may not be that way today. And this is a very gentle nudge to suggest that when you go to design the facade of those lab buildings, would you just please respect the fact that the city is generously allowing buildings with no height limit, and all this is really saying is to design those so that they are sensitive to the context with which they are in. It doesn't even necessarily impact gross square footage if a simple cornice is added or some other type of horizontal articulation. So this is a very gentle nudge is how I would characterize these conditions.
Great. Thank you very much for the clarity and what it is that you were intending by introducing these proposed conditions. I think each one of them speaks to something the board has generally agreed on. I think staff, from my recollection of staff's comments, has been that staff agrees with it. And I think we're in a place, Dan, do you think you have the opportunity to draft up some language so we can vote on this tonight based on what Rob's intent was? Because I think we're all on the same page at this stage.
All right, Mr. Chair, are you suggesting that the language that we showed earlier or read earlier is too specific?
I think it is. I think it doesn't. I think it gets a little bit too deep into the weeds as to what those specific buildings are going to be. And I think if we broaden what the condition says and try to encompass what Rob and I think this board's intent is to simply make those buildings relate more perfectly and respectfully to the streets and to the surrounding buildings, instead of just being these, as I've said it, and Rob picked up on it, kind of the Emerald City coming up out of nowhere. That even though there are no necessarily height limits, that we should really look at an intent to constrain them to not be too out of place.
Mr. Chair, I would suggest if these were to be included, you could delete the last sentence of both, which is a means of achieving the appearance of a podium.
Could you bring that language back up so I can
I'm
see?
sorry. So you could knock out that last sentence there in both of them, and by chance add the appearance of a 4 to 6 story podium facing Windsor Street, which would be even more qualitative without suggesting the means of achieving the goal.
I think that's the intent of what Rob has put forward, that I agree with. And I think the same should be made with that second part of the condition. What I'd also like is when you have the proposed conditions kind of redlined in, I do want to hear the opinion of the applicant, make sure that we're all on the same page, that we're not imposing conditions that are too stringent, but also make sure that everybody's on the same page as to what it is that this board is looking for in this master plan application.
Mr. Chair, I think we may not have addressed the applicant's concern that the first of these conditions.
That's what I was hoping we could go to next.
Great, and I'll defer.
Mr. Chair, this is Rebecca speaking. Mr. Fenton has indicated that he'd like to speak again.
Please.
Mr. Fenton, you're unmuted.
Yep. This is John. Once again, thank you. Listen, this is obviously made very difficult given the technological issues, that we have in the communication, and sometimes I see the screen, sometimes I don't, and oftentimes it's much easier to do this in person. Obviously, we all know that, and it's a frustration for some of us more than others. We are respectful and sensitive to the surrounding neighborhood. We've done, a lot of work with the community. We're not trying to build something that's not welcome. We're trying to be part of the community and to support it. And we hope it to be supporting us as well. So I think we're heading in the right direction with this language. I'm not an architect, but I think if we can find some language like this that suggests that we continue to be sensitive to the concerns of a smaller scale neighborhood on the edges of our development, we're fine with this language. But I would also like to go back and see the original language as it relates to the ACE space in the community space, because I'm hearing from my colleagues that the interpretation of that language could be misinterpreted to suggest that all of the ACE space needs to happen in the first 3 buildings and not in the 4th, and that wasn't our intention. I think out of an abundance of caution and trying to get to a place where we get to vote, I just like to go through that language again with the board and staff, and allow Mr. Snell to address concerns he might have from an interpretation perspective.
Yeah, what I'd like to know is, I understand that unfortunately we're all working remotely and the technology isn't where we all would like it to be. And can Attorney Snell see the the shared screen with the proposed conditions with the changes?
I can. This is Matthew Snell.
Okay, that's good. What I want to do is make sure that the intent of the board is reflected appropriately in these conditions. And if the applicant, agrees, they will. If they don't, they don't. So the applicant's concern, as I've understood it, now still centers around the ACE space and whether it can be incorporated within phase. And I just want to make sure, like maybe Dan's assistance in discussing what the condition as drafted says and what the will be.
Yes, Mr. Chair, you can still see my screen, is that correct?
I can, yes.
Okay, this is revised language again that did not change the original that was proposed in September and was text that we developed with Mr. Buchanan to amend this so that all of the ACE space could go throughout all 4 phases. I would change this reference to phase 3 here to phase 4. And then I would add a reference after building 3A and 3B to reference building 4, A, B, and C. And that would mean that ACE space would be permitted throughout all 4 phases at the discretion of the applicant in any of the buildings included in the phases, and that the specific floor space identified for arts and creative enterprise space in any of those buildings be identified on the floor plans that they submit for development review. So I would just change this to phase 4 and add the reference to those building types or those buildings after 3B.
I want to make sure that that's what the intent of the board is as well. Rob?
This is Rob. I was not intending to change anything from what had previously been in the October 9th memo on that, because that really wasn't my concern. My concern was on the community center space. So what you see here is drafted primarily to separate, the community center from the arts. I do not have personally any, I don't have a strong opinion as to whether some of the art space is in phase 4 or not. So that this is not a big deal to me, but maybe others people have different opinions.
I will say that it is not of a terrible concern to me, but it seems like it is a concern to the applicant who would like that that amendment to be made, and I would be in support of that amendment. Is anybody else on the would anybody else on the planet would like to weigh in? If not, that's okay. I believe that addresses the applicant's concern as to the ACE space. Just make sure that I just want to see the there we go. Magic, I guess.
This is John Fenton.
Yes, Mr. Fenton, I just want to make sure that the condition
Yes, it's fine.
is viewing is what the intent of the board is as it follows the discussion with you.
I think this addresses our concern and clarifies it in a way that I don't believe can be misinterpreted. So,
thank you. What I'd like just to make sure is that before the board moves forward in making votes on the 7 required findings, that these, as amended, be read one by one into the record, just so everybody's on the same page as to what the amendments are and what the actual conditions will say. So I think we're at that stage. Does anybody else have anything that they would like to address on these conditions or of anything else before I ask these either Dan or Rebecca to read these individually into the record.
I can do that. I'm already unmuted. So these proposed new conditions or revised conditions so the first one is that the recommended condition for the 20,000 square foot community center and 102,700 square foot arts and creative enterprise space must be provided by the completion of phase 3 period. The applicant may allocate these spaces through phases 1, 2, and 3 as desired period. That was included in the second staff memo. Be struck and replaced with 2 conditions. The first addressing the community center, that 20,000 gross square feet of commercial floor space must be reserved for a community center principal use in building 4A or 4C with direct egress to either civic space lot C2 or C3, period. This space must be identified on floor plans submitted for development review, period. And the second one would be addressing the A space, arts and creative enterprise space. A total of 102,700 gross square feet of commercial floor space must be reserved for uses from the arts and creative enterprise principal use categories by the completion of phase 4 and may be allocated across building 1, building 2, building 3A, building 3B, building 4A, building 4B, or building 4C at the discretion of the applicant. The specific floor space reserved for uses from the arts and creative enterprise principal use categories of building 1, building 2, building 3A, building 3B, building 4A, building 4B, and building 4C must be identified on floor plans submitted for development review. The 2 related to buildings were revised as originally proposed by Mr. Buchanan to read, number 1, that building 2 must be designed with the appearance of a 4 to 6 story podium facing Windsor Street. And the second one, that building 3A must be designed with the appearance of a 4 to 6 story podium facing Harding and South Streets. And then related to civic space, the number 1, the design of civic space lot C2 must not preclude the inclusion of a pedestrian bridge over the MBTA Fitchburg / Green Line rail right of way. And similar language for the design of civic space lot C3 must not preclude the inclusion of a pedestrian bridge over the MBTA Fitchburg / Green Line rail right of way. And that's everything.
And thank you very much. What we're going to do now, I don't know if anybody else has any other questions or comments. I see Rob Dickey's hand raised. I don't know if Mr. Dickey's still be recognized, but if he does, to be unmuted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Rebecca speaking. Mr. Dickey, you are unmuted.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Rob Dickey from Leggett McCall Properties, John Fenton's partner on this project. So I just wanted to address Rob Buchanan's point on the desire to see these buildings designed in the context of the neighborhood and to address the podium condition, which I think now that we've heard Rob's concern specifically tonight again, and also have a better understanding now of what is being discussed. I think on the building 2 condition, we in our current conceptual and schematic designs for that building, we actually have effectively today a podium at the 2nd level. And so I think the condition that we would like, we would find acceptable on building 2 would be a podium condition at 2 to 4, which I think addresses the same concern, but in the context of what we've started to design and conceive is more consistent with where we think we'll end up. So I think if the board is in agreement or agreeable to that change to the condition as written, that would help us proceed with how we're thinking about and conceiving building 2 today. I think as it relates to building 3, we are okay with the condition as it's written, 4 to 6 story podium facing Harding and South Streets. And we appreciate and find it helpful and more simple with reducing this, to the single sentence in each case.
I think we've lost our chair. We may want to pause momentarily if he's having technology issues.
Yeah, this is Rebecca speaking. Thank you, Mr. Buchanan. I am I understand that he was just having a problem with his camera and was able to hear us, but let's pause for a moment. Since Ms. Aboff has left us, Mr. Denning, in the role of chair, could you please ask for your colleagues for a 5-minute recess?
Hello, it's Mike Captain. I'm sorry, I'm still here. I was trying to figure out what the issue with my camera is.
Came back as soon as he thought that I might be chair for a minute.
No. Hang on.
So for the good of the record, this is Rebecca Cooper, just noting that Mr. Capuano, Chair Capuano has been able to listen and hear.
Yes, isn't that, can you see me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. It's the issue with remote meetings, right? I apologize. So great. Thank you very much, Mr. Dickey, for your comments. I think, is the planning board ready to move forward with the findings with these conditions that have been amended? Okay, so the way this works is the first time we've done this, so I'm going to ask for Dan's assistance if I need it. We have 7 findings of fact that we need to make that relate to the project in 7 different categories of what the zoning provides. And instead of making specific findings of fact within each one and discussing each one as a standalone, I would like, I think for the benefit of expediency, we've discussed all of these. They've come to us through the form of staff commentary, through discussion with members of the board, with testimony that we've received, and discussion with the applicant. So when I move to make these 7 specific findings of fact, I intend to make it with the consideration of all of the discussion that has been made on the project that has touched on each of these factors. So each one of these is going to be its own separate vote and will require its own separate roll call. And we'll start with number 1. The chair moves to make the following finding of fact. The clerk seconds the motion that the comprehensive plan and existing policy plans and standards established by the city have been met. The chair votes aye.
Sam votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
Great, we have a unanimous vote on number 1. Number 2, the chair moves to make a finding of fact, and the clerk seconds that the intent of the zoning district where the property is located is appropriate. The chair votes aye.
Sam votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
We have a unanimous vote in support of that finding of fact. The chair moves to make a finding of fact, and the clerk seconds that the proposed alignment and connectivity of the thoroughfare network is appropriate. The chair votes aye.
Sam votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
Yeah, a unanimous vote on that. The chair moves to make a finding of fact, and the clerk seconds that the gross floor area allocated to different use categories is appropriate and meets the statutory requirements. The chair votes aye.
Sam votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
We have a unanimous vote. The chair moves to make a finding of fact, and the clerk seconds that mitigation proposed to alleviate any adverse impacts on utility infrastructure has been made and meets the statutory requirements. The chair votes aye.
Sam votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
We have a unanimous vote. The chair moves to make a finding of fact, and the clerk seconds that the proposed development phasing is appropriate and meets the statutory requirements. The chair votes aye.
Sam votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
We have a unanimous vote. The chair makes a motion to make a finding of fact that the proposed on-street parking to address demand by customers of retail sales, food, beverage, or commercial services principal uses is appropriate and meets the minimum statutory requirement, which is seconded by the clerk. The chair votes aye.
Sam votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
I believe those are all the findings of fact that this board is required to make in order to approve this master plan special permit. Dan, correct me if I've made a misstatement.
Nope, that is correct. Upon making those findings, you can vote to approve.
Wonderful. And in that case, the chair moves to approve the master plan special permit, seconded by the clerk. A roll call vote. The chair votes aye.
Sam votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
And Rob votes aye.
Thank you all very much. We have a unanimous vote. I want to thank everybody that was involved in the drafting and the perfection of this master plan special permit. I'm excited to see the next phases coming in. I'm congratulatory to the applicant, and I would welcome you all back for the next phase of the development. So thank you, everybody, very, very much. Our next meeting is February 4th, where we will, one of the items that we will have on our agenda is other business, but the planning board is going to have on its agenda the officers and elections for officers for the planning board for the calendar year of 2021. So does anybody else have anything they would like to add for the good of the meeting? No? Seeing none, thank you all very, very much. Congratulations to the applicant. We will see you all in a few weeks. The chair moves to adjourn, seconded by the clerk. Chair votes aye.
Sam votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you all. Thank you, Dan.
Take care.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you
Good
all.
night.